Hello. I don't know what time of day it is. This is the 5th time I've tried to record this. I've given up. The lipstick has smeared. It's after 3 o'clock. It's time for my scotch. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Beer. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. Yeah, beer would be good. All right. This is the November nonfiction wrap-up, I hope. So I was reading Larp and telling you guys all about it during Manic Moments, which is when I read 60 pages and summarized it in 60 seconds, more or less. So most of Larp was reported in that process, and I enjoyed it. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. And the two things that I did think this book could have benefited from were photographs of the found objects and, rug, whatever you call that stuff. Maps, little situational maps, because she gives you a sense of where on the Thames she is, because there's a great big map of the Thames. But if you look at the map, you'll see, okay, Tower of London, Wapping, whatever. But once she gets down onto the shorelines and she's describing the northern, quite often it was on the north side of the river. So there would be where the water was, and then there would be where it was all mucky and muddy right along the embankments. And she locates piers and wharves and stairs and pubs overlooking and things like that. So I would have liked little situational maps. And so if she ever does a reissue of this book, I think she could really benefit from that. I think it would just make the storytelling that much more fun. So I thought that was an excellent read. I would have read it faster had I not been reading other books, because I was mixing up things and trying to make the game. So I would think that most people would like that if they like. If you're squeamish about getting your hands mucky or your feet sinking into mud, no, not so much, because she does describe that. All right, the other book that I was reading and was part of my Manic Moments was The Extinction and Evolution, What Fossils Reveal About the History of Life by Niles Eldredge. Now, I love this book. I thought it was brilliant from beginning to end. I thought that the photographs were so well done. They're from museums all over the world or collections. And the text, although it's pretty small, very much informational, not just, not just descriptive of what was happening with the photo on the other side of the page, but really going into the information that how this fossil would be in the context of the examination of extinction and evolution. And they go from early days to current days and talk a little bit about our own eventual extinction, which is inevitable. But I'm saying these words in the middle of a pandemic that seems to be on its 4th wave, so I don't know how long it's going to take for the human species to eradicate itself. But it doesn't look like, based on these kinds of discussions, the human's going to have to do some more pretty serious damage before we are unable to inhabit our world. Because one of the things that a species needs in order to go to full extinction is a loss of habitat. And so one of the things that I wondered about before I started reading this book was, when you read Darwin's timelines, it's like it spans all these generations of, let's say, frogs, and you just have one green frog sitting on a log, and over time you continue to have this green frog, but then you get a red frog and an orange frog, but they don't really show up on the sort of species line, because Darwin's theory is taking millennia into account, whereas the concept of moments along the timeline means that you get a species sort of growing and coming out and specializing to a slightly different habitat. So the green frog might be in water that's at 10 degrees, and the red frog might be at water that's at 12 degrees, and the yellow one maybe is a bit more mud related. And so you get all these kinds of breaking off of little subspecies. Well, the green guys aren't going to, they're going to last forever as long as the water is 10 degrees. If that water warms up to 12 degrees, then the blue frogs are going to come over and take over that habitat. So all species need to be losing habitat in order to have a full extinction. And quite often the invading species makes things even worse by preying on the existing frogs in this case. This is a book that you need to sit down and consider, because it's just too big to be able to take on the bus or take into the bathtub. So it's definitely a cup of tea sort of book. I have been interrupted so many times in this video at this point that I don't remember what I've said and not said about this book. I really enjoyed it. I think that the photos could have used some kind of measurement tool, whether it was length or mass or weight or something, just to give a context, because sometimes on one page you would get a picture of a trilobite, for instance, beside a pterodactyl. Now the images are not necessarily chronological in time, but they are chronological in expressing an idea. So are you looking at a little trilobite, or are you looking at one of the big guys? Is this an early species of pterodactyl? So some kind of scale could have been really useful. And the other thing that would have been really useful would have been maps. The maps would have been great in terms of all the continental changes that took place. Sometimes, for instance, the Sahara Desert was an inland sea, but at that point, was that when South Africa was attached or not attached, or more lumpy, or, so these kinds of things would have worked out really nice in addition. My daughter pointed out to me, because she's so smart, that quite often in those sorts of situations, she Googles maps. So I didn't think about that at all. And so I know going forward, when I'm reading kinds of books like this, that I do have the Googler to help me out. All right, while I was reading this book, I was also reading The Ends of the World, Volcanic Apocalypses, Lethal Oceans, and Our Quest to Understand Earth's Past Mass Extinctions by Paul Brennan. I did not finish this book, and that's not because of the book itself, it's because of timing. It was a difficult book to absorb at the same time as I was doing the other one. The other one is much more biological, natural history. There's definitely a discussion about tectonic plates and volcanoes and soils and that sort of thing, but that's not its main focus, whereas that's the main focus in this book. And I just found that there wasn't too much difficult vocabulary. It was that the books are not organized in the same kind of sequencing. So you couldn't just read chapter 1 here and chapter 1 there, and they would kind of mesh. The different authors had taken different approaches on how they were going to organize their thoughts and their chronologies and so on. So I'm going to get this one back out in the new year, probably in the spring sometime, after I've had other stuff, that will all sink down, one hopes, and I will remember it, one hopes, and they'll pick this one up and take the subject on from a geological time frame, and just see if I can put all the parts of the puzzle together. Yeah, so that's why I didn't read that book. I do recommend it. All right, the fourth book that I had on my radar is The Inconvenient Indian, a curious account of Native people in North America by Thomas King. Thomas King is my best, favoriteest author. I love him to death. This book, when I first read it in 2013, I was so confused because I was expecting fiction, because I don't always pay attention. And then when I read what I was reading, I thought, oh, this is a terrible fiction book. And then I realized it's not fiction, it's real. Carefully researched, and I was astonished. I had no idea that the bad things that happened to First Nations was so systemic. I thought a bad thing here and a bad thing there, and maybe this province was a bit of a rogue province in the way it treated First Nations, that kind of thing. I didn't realize it was just across the country in every sphere, and so it was a disturbing book to read, and I didn't finish it at the time because I was overwhelmed with that kind of information. Listening to this as an audiobook, I think, is what I would recommend. The person who does the reading has been able to interpret the tone of Thomas King's goals. He's sarcastic, sardonic, scathing. He cannot get his head around, like we shouldn't get our head around, of the gall of white historians writing these stories that were so inaccurate and in some instances just out and out fabrications. So the reader of the audiobooks really captures that kind of incredulity. Now, I read a lot faster than the audiobook goes, so it's kind of one of the reasons I don't read a lot or listen to audiobooks is I can read a lot faster. This is a book that I think really, if you listen to it, it got a different way of penetrating your brain and taking on board the information that is really, really sad. So the last book I want to talk to you about is Dragonology, and the complete book of dragons. Okay, this is a natural history of dragons, and it's such a book for younger people. The text is small and somewhat intense. It uses the occasional ye olde terminology. It's got little liftaways, so it's a fun, it's not a hugely interactive book, but it does have some interactive moments. And it talks about the different kinds of dragons from the east and the west, and how to find and track a dragon, and how to fly with a dragon, and just, it's really a charming little book. And because it glitters, I'm going to put it underneath the Christmas tree and watch the emeralds sparkle. And that's it for me. I hope that you all have a really good week. I'll be back with some Christmas books if all goes well in December. I hope your reading dreams and adventures continue to come true. I'll see you later. Instances of new information. Oh, excuse me. I'm not going to edit this. I'm just going to keep going, says the lady who's crying on the bottom of the steps. You just have to read it and get on with the book. And it was all stuff that I kind of knew anyways. It's I don't have the bloody light on. You'd think because I was drinking that would be the reason why I'm having all these screw-ups, but no, I'm drinking because I'm having all these screw-ups.